Hello and welcome back. You know the score by now. We are looking at PS5 SSDs. It's a Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus, and there is the benchmark from PlayStation. 6,557 megabytes per second there on screen. We're going to go into our first game. Of course, it's Demon's Souls. You know Demon's Souls. It's that game from the PS3. They revamped and launch titled this bad boy. An incredible game. I don't even want to talk about how many hours I've put into all the different versions of this and Dark Souls, but we aren't here for that. We're not here to hear my shallow brag. We want to hear about this game's loading. We're looking at the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus versus the internal SSD. Our first test is going to be loading this game from a save spot from the title screen directly into the main hub Nexus world. So again, from a save spot on the title screen, offline, so none of your server delays. They're on screen running side by side. Boom. I think that was indistinguishable. The fact that a game like this can load in 2 to 3 seconds still absolutely blows my mind. But it's still excellent that the internal SSD and the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus are still both doing it, keeping pace. This may not be the game to show us which is going to do it better. Next, we're going to load up from a milestone straight into a world there, and this is the second world there. Forgive me, sore throat. Going in, and I think on screen, do you know what? I don't think we can give either game an advantage there. I would argue that was near enough indistinguishable between the two of them. Yes, the screen on the left is from a separate PS5 recording, and that separate PS5 recording had different contrast settings there, what unfortunately have made the capture a little grainier. Sorry about that, guys. Going into our second test, this is the second stone there, the Archstone. As we have a look, this is going into the start of the game. I think it was slightly quicker on the PS5 there for a brief second. No, it wasn't. The Sabrent there took over at the end. I would argue slightly, the Rocket Plus was a pinch faster overall, I think. I mean, we are talking fractions of a second, tenths, hundreds, but I do think it was the quicker. Let's move on to our next game. Of course, it is Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. It's the game you guys wanted to see tested on all of these SSDs the most, and of course we're bringing it in for this Ratchet and Clank. We're running two areas just like my other videos. We are testing the start of the game, so after the first cutscene we are loading from a save game with a checkpoint right at the start of the game, and then later on 20-30 minutes into the game we are doing that large transitional segment where it's the first time you breach different dimensions. So let's go into our first test there on the internal SSD versus the Rocket. And on this one, it's from the save game. And boom, we're at the start of the game. Again, every test we've done so far, bar one, the loading of the game at the beginning has seemingly been a pinch quicker on the internal SSD. But I do think I did get lucky with that first recording there on the system. Whether that was because tapping the button rapidly enough, a slight difference. So I'm willing to maybe query the performance there at the intro of the game here, but the next test where we go through the transitional worlds is probably the most important, because that's the one that really takes advantage of that storage being read from the system so fantastically fast in real time there. But as we make our way forward in the game there, again, totally different there, just to, test out some of the variables there we've got on screen. We can start making our way into that test of the dimensional change part that was originally previewed when the PS5 was first kind of shown off a little bit there. So again, this is an on-rails area, but it is still all being rendered. I've made sure to kind of move around the person and the camera within the game to show that it is live control, all this stuff happening in real time. And I think at the moment, the Sabrent is gaining ground. I don't know if anyone's noticed that. The Sabrent, I think, is running that pinch quicker. I know this is an on-rails area, but there are elements in between them that I think, even with them running side by side, I think the Sabrent might be doing this the tiniest pinch better. But given that it's an on-rails area, it makes it very, very tough to gauge that between the two of them. So having a look there, this is about to end this segment where it will lead into the cutscene ending the area. But the Sabrent there, for me, it did seemingly perform that tiniest pinch quicken there, even though they both started at the same time. And that difference between them, although it is tenths, hundredths of a second, I think it's the tiniest pinch better there on the Sabrent from the load. So we're on to the next game. Resident Evil Village. Resident Evil Village there, the 8th game in the Resident Evil franchise. Again, multi-platform. But this is a game that is pretty big and pretty graphical there on the PS5. We've got 2 segments there, one near the beginning of the game in the castle, and one later on in the game at the stronghold, where we're going to travel from the stronghold all the way back to the village to show the transitional areas. But before we do that, let's go straight into loading the save spot directly from the game's title screen onto the castle area. So we've got them loading at the same time, and pretty much identical. The pistol was drawn at the same time. Again, grainy footage on the left hand side of the screen. I know that's because we're recording on the 2 PlayStations at different contrast. I know I keep repeating that, guys. I'm sick of saying it, you're sick of hearing it, but that you may be one of those people that haven't heard me explain that yet. But that's why the one on the left is a bit grainier, but that's nothing to do with the system media it's being drawn from. Next, the stronghold. This is a slightly longer segment. We're loading from a save spot identically. And again, that loaded absolutely the exact same speed. Could not have been quicker in my mind. And at this is where we're running through the game, all the way through 2 or 3 separate areas of the game, going from the stronghold to the bridge, to the dead area with all the bodies and stuff, past the water area, all the way back to the village, to make sure that the game isn't going to have any hidden loading barriers as we run through this. And again, with one running on the internal SSD beautifully and the Sabrent Rocket Plus keeping pace exactly the same, I think right now, because remember the big pull from this is it quicker than the internal SSD? And it's lovely when we see that, but we want to know that these SSDs can match the pace of the internal system and therefore not present a bottleneck down the line. And arguably, this is proving it lovely that this SSD is not going to be a slouch. In our previous video testing, it did outpace the PlayStation in a number of key areas, so it'll be interesting to see just how far that will go throughout more testing and the comparisons later this week. Which brings us into the final 2 games. Again, the next one we have featured on another video before, but we will talk about it nonetheless because I think it's important enough, and that's Doom Eternal with the PS5 upgrade. God, I love that title screen. It's got all of the extras bumped into it there, so the game is running at highfalutin PS5 extras in the video settings. And we're only running the one save there. We're loading from a save game in the campaign mode directly into the world to see how they compare when loading directly from the start of the game there. So let's go straight into it. We're going to load the save. When we do load this save, it's the same one we're using before. The key thing to look out for, by the way, isn't just when I rapidly tap X to go into it, which can cause a delay at that point. But the real key thing to look out for here is when we're running through the world. Just to give you some idea about how much is created. The Sabrent seems to have the tiniest pinch of an advantage. It's very hard to measure. But the sheer scale of the world during this segment, I think there's a lot of assets being drawn. Obviously nowhere near what we've seen from Rift Apart, but still, this is a good example of a PS4 game that's been scaled up, and it isn't just a bog standard frame rate increase. There's so much more to it. And given the playing community of this game, I did want to include it for this. And also, it's a beautiful looking game, isn't it? So, finally, we're going to go on to our last game. If you watch my other video, you know what it is. It is GTA 5. GTA 5, very popular game, and although there is an upscaled PS5 version coming later in 2021, I wanted to test this version because GTA 5 is still an incredibly popular game and people are still playing it, and the size of the thing, it's, you know, I think it's important enough to be factored into our testing, even if it isn't a direct game. Don't worry, I'm saving Spider-Man Miles Morales for another video. But let's make our way in. This is a full game load. For those that don't remember, GTA 5 loading directly from the main PlayStation menu is one of, painfully, the slowest loading games I've ever seen. It is just painful how long GTA 5 takes to load, and although there have been improvements, it still takes a while. I would say the Sabrent has already taken a noticeable lead there. Although it's less than a second, it's clearly loading things quicker. And if this is anything like my testing of the WD Black SN850, that gain will get fractionally bigger throughout the load time. But the Sabrent Rocket Plus, despite both of these, this game running from the internal storage, so not a USB, despite this game running noticeably, it's a slow old game, the Sabrent Rocket 4 is taking the lead. Although they start at the same time, it's clearly ahead there. And as we go into the main game, it's not a huge advantage, but it's notable there. Ignore the alert thing there, it's just a save game. But I've got to say, for me, that Sabrent there was clearly an advantage there of loading that game. And it's not the first time in this comparison that Sabrent has taken the lead in this or the previous comparison. So their Rocket Plus is still doing very well indeed as a PS5 storage upgrade. But this has been my second test of the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus. If you enjoyed the video, click like. Again, there will be more videos like this, so do click the bell or click subscribe to be abreast of those as they happen for when this comes out of beta as a real feature when you do choose to do your upgrade. And of course, visit the links in the description to everything I've talked about today, products and videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time.